Okay, so today we're going to be talking about completing the square. This is another method to solving quadratic equations, okay? So we have a warm-up, and here they just want us to factor the trinomials, okay? So remember, to factor, you need the box and decimals, right? If I open up decimals, okay? And so, I don't have a lot of room. So here I have x squared plus 8x plus 16. So, I'm not going to draw my box. Well, yeah, I can draw it right here. Okay? And so what goes where? So x squared in the top left, and then 16 bottom right. Good. So then I need my two equations, right? xy equals, and then x plus y. So what does xy equal? So good. So xy equals 1 times 16. And then x plus y equals what? My middle term, right? Which is 8. So x plus y equals 8. Right? And so then to find my factors, you find where they intersect. And so it's 4 and 4. Right? So that means here is a 4x and here is a 4x. So what times what gives me x squared? X and x. What times x gives me 4x? So 4, and then what times x gives me 4x? And so if you notice, they're the same thing, right? X plus 4 and x plus 4. So if they're the same, what are we supposed to do? Do we put another one, or what else? So we square it, right? Because x plus 4 squared means x plus 4 times x plus 4. Right? Does that make sense? Okay, so the next one we do the same thing. Draw our box. So x squared, top left, 81 in the bottom right. And so xy equals what? One times 81, and then x plus y equals negative 18. Good. So if I go look for it, my factors are negative 9 and negative 9. So what are you starting to notice? So what's x squared? X times x. X times what gives me negative 9x? And what times x gives me negative 9x? And again, so they're the same thing, right? X minus 9 and x minus 9 squared. Okay? So if you notice, they're starting to become the same thing, right? These are called perfect square trinomials. Okay? And so if you do x squared plus 2x plus 1, if you factor that, that's x plus 1 squared. And if you factor this right here, it's going to be x minus 5 squared. Okay? So, now, looking at that, looking at the warm-up and looking at the perfect square trinomials. From the middle term, how do I get this number right here? So from 8, how do I get 8? How do I turn 8 into a 4? How do I turn 2 into a 1? Negative 18 into a negative 9? Negative 10 to negative 5. So, these are called perfect square trinomials, meaning if you divide that middle term by 2, right, and I get 4. And to check it, you can square this. So 4 squared is 16. 1 squared is 1, negative 9 squared is 81, and negative 5 squared is 25. Does that make sense? Okay, so these are perfect square trinomials. So, now that you notice this, it should be easy to factor something like this. Okay, so let's look at number 1. We're going to factor the perfect square, okay? And then, just like yesterday, we're going to take the square roots of both sides and then solve for x, okay? So number one, what do you think the factors are? Like, looking at this, what do you think this is going to turn into? Just this part right here, just this. How do I factor it? Because these are all perfect squares. So what did we do? What did we do with these terms right here? So then what's 4 divided by 2? So this becomes x plus 2 squared. And so let's check it. 2 times 2 is, so 4, so that means I'm good. So this is x plus 2 squared equals 25. If you have to factor it and do the xy equals and the x plus y, that's fine. Okay? So now from here, what did we do yesterday? When we have something like this. How do I solve for x from here? What do I have to do? Take the square root, right? So if I take the square root on both sides, because that's what gets rid of the square, right? So this becomes x plus 2 equals, and then what's the square root of 25? 5. But what am I missing? What did we have yesterday? The plus or minus, right? So now I have x plus 2 equals plus or minus 5. Now, here's where it gets a little tricky, because now you have to split them up, okay? It says plus or minus, but you have to do both, okay? So I have to do x plus 2 equals positive 5, and then x plus 2 equals negative 5. And then now I can solve for x, and all I have to do to solve for x is what? How do I solve for x here? So I want to get x by itself, so I'm going to subtract 2 on both sides. So then this becomes 5 minus 2, which is what? So x equals 3. And then now I'm going to subtract 2 for this one as well. So x equals, what's negative 5 minus 2? Negative 7. So that means my two solutions are negative 7, comma 3. Does that make sense? Okay, try number 2 out. Try number 2. Alright, so number 2. So if I factor this out, right? Again, this is a perfect square, so you could either divide b by 2, or what you also could do is take the square root of c, right? Because the square root of 16 is 4, the square root of 1 is 1, the square root of 81 is 9, and the square root of 25 is 5. The only difference is whenever you do that, like over here, if you have negatives, it's going to give you a positive answer, so you have to look at the middle term to see if it's going to be negative or positive. So here, that's why I like to just worry about the b. So if I divide negative 12 by 2, then I get negative 6. Right? So that means this becomes x minus 6 squared equals 81. Does that make sense? Okay? And so now, just like yesterday, I can solve by taking the square roots. If I take the square root of both sides, so here I have x minus 6 equals plus or minus, and what's the square root of 81? Right. And again, these split up into 2, to where it's the plus and the minus. So x minus 6 equals 9, and then x minus 6 equals negative 9. Alright, so how do I solve for x? Add 6 on both sides, right? So this becomes 9 plus 6, 15, and then negative 9 plus 6, negative 3. So my two solutions are negative 3 and positive 15. Does that make sense? Okay, so try 3 and 4 out. 3 and 4. Okay, so if you did them, you should have gotten x equals 5 and 9, and x equals negative 2 and negative 4. Okay? So now, it's not always going to be set up to where it's perfect like that. Okay? Sometimes we ourselves are going to have to do that. Okay? And we call that completing the square. So, the way we're going to do that is first is, so 8. If I divide 8 by 2, I should be 4, right? But remember I said, in order to check it, if we would have done 4, then this has to, if I square this, it has to give me 25. If I square negative 9, it gives me 81, right? So if I take 8 and I divide it by 2, I get 4, right? What's 4 squared? 16, right? But that's not what I have here. So that means I do not have a perfect square. Okay, so what I have to do is I have to move this 7 out of the way. So I'm going to subtract 7 from both sides. And so my new equation is going to become x squared plus 8x equals negative 7. Okay, and so now you're going to take half of b. So right now my b is 8, right? So I'm going to do 8 divided by 2, which is 4, right? So now I'm going to square 4. So 4 squared is what? What's 4 squared? 16. Okay? So you divide b by 2, and you get 4. So you square this, so 4 squared is 16. So now you're going to add 16 to both sides, right? Because if I add it to one side, I have to add it to the other. So I'm going to add 16 here and add 16 here. So my new equation becomes x squared plus 8x plus 16. And so what's negative 7 plus 16? Negative 7 plus 16 right here. 9. Right? So now I can find the factor, the perfect square. And so what does this turn into? X plus 4, right? This is x plus 4 squared equals 9. Right? Because 8 divided by 2 is 4, and then 4 squared is 16. So that's how you can check if it's a perfect square. And so now, just like the ones up there, you're going to take the square root of both. So this becomes x plus 4 equals plus or minus, and so what's the square root of 9? 3. Alright, so now I have two options. I have x plus 4 equals positive 3, and then x plus 4 equals negative 3. And so now I have to solve for x on both of them, because these are two different options. Alright, so I have to subtract by 4 on both of them. So x equals, what's 3 minus 4? Negative 1. And then negative 3 minus 4, negative 7. So those are my two solutions, negative 1 and negative 7. That makes sense? So basically now we're adding this step right here. Okay, where you move this over to the other side, and so you divide the middle term, or your b, by 2, then you square it, and so that's what you add on both sides. That's what we call completing the square. And here, these steps right here are just what we've been doing up there. Does that make sense? Okay, so try number 1 on the back. And I'll go over it right now a little bit. Okay, so number 5, what do I got to do first? So I got to move the 27. So plus 27, so I have to subtract 27 from both sides. So my equation now becomes x squared minus 12x equals negative 27. Alright, so then what's my next step? So I gotta divide negative 12 by 2, and I get what? Negative 6. Right? And so then with the negative 6, what do I have to do? So I have to square negative 6. And so negative 6 times negative 6 is what? It's actually positive 36, right? Because negative 6 times negative 6, there's 2 negatives times each other, so it's positive 36. So now I have to add 36 to both sides. So my equation becomes x squared minus 12x plus 36 equals, and so what's negative 27 plus 36? 9. So it's positive 9. So this perfect square, what does it become? So it's going to become x minus 6 squared equals 9. And so then, take the square root. Good. If I take the square root on both sides, so this becomes x minus 6 equals, and then this on this side, what is it? What's here? Just 3? Plus or minus 3. Good. So then if you split them up, you have x minus 6 equals positive 3, and then x minus 6 equals negative 3. Right? And so now I just have to solve for x. So I'm going to add 6 to both sides. Okay? So my solutions are 6 plus 3, which is what? 9, and then negative 3 plus 6, 3. So my two solutions are 9 and 3. Okay, try number 6 out. Try number 6. Okay, so number 6. So what's the first thing I have to do? Add 5 to both sides. Good. So this becomes x squared plus 4x equals 5. And then? So 4 divided by 2, which is 2. And then 2 squared is 4. So I'm going to add 4 to both sides of this equation right here. So this becomes x squared plus 4x plus 4, and then 5 plus 4 is 9, right? And so this is a perfect square trinomial, so what does this becomes? So x plus 2 squared. So if you notice, it's going to become whatever you whenever you divide it by 2, whatever's here and here, that's what that becomes. Does that make sense? Okay. And so then the 9 just comes down. And so from here, what do I have to do? Take the square root. So x plus 2 equals plus or minus 3. So then you split these two up into two options. So x plus 2 equals 3. And then x plus 2 equals negative 3. Okay. And then I just have to solve for x. And what do I have to do? Subtract 2. So my two solutions are 3 minus 2, which is 1, and then negative 3 minus 2 is negative 5. Does it make sense? Any questions on this? This is just another way to solve quadratic equations.